I just wanted to thank you all for coming and hanging out with us. This particular webinar is being recorded and also being live streamed. We've got a global audience of teachers and participants who are interested in this topic, so we wanted to make it as accessible as possible. It's great to see all of you. I know we've got people coming in from the Philippines, people coming in from India, people coming in from the Middle East. So we've got a wide range of people here in a wide range of time zones. What I want to do is kind of kick off and get started right away, because this is a 45-minute webinar. We've got a lot of content to cover, but also I want to be able to, have a bit of time for any thoughts, any reflections, any questions that you may have as part of this. I'm about to share my screen, and so when I share my screen, there's really no reason for you to have your camera on unless you just want to. That's fine. I won't be able to see you because I'm going to be sharing my screen. At the end of the webinar, I'll unshare my screen and I'll turn my camera back on so we can have that bit of discussion time. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started with the learning journey. All right, welcome to our webinar. This has been a series that we've been hosting at BSD on different topics. And so if you've been to some of our other webinars, thanks for joining us again. Today, the topic is social and emotional learning for the digital age. And we thought this would be a good topic because it's just been such a relevant topic, with learning and, learning about the content and learning about the subjects is just one part of learning, but this whole social emotional thing has become really important. And so let's think about how to get started, what are some resources that we can use, and then what are some practical tools that we can start to develop in the classroom. So that's what we'll cover today. I'll share briefly just a little bit about BSD education, what we are doing, why we're doing it. We're going to talk about the CASEL framework, CASEL, which is a global framework for implementing social emotional learning. I'm going to share with you some practices that I use in the classroom every day. I'm also going to talk about the unique proposition of using play as a way to connect to social emotional learning. I'll share with you some sample projects at BSD about how we integrate play and social emotional learning into our curriculum, and talk to you about a free trial that we have available. And then lastly, we'll end with some Q&A for questions, thoughts, and comments that you all might have. Those of you that haven't joined me before, my name is Mark, and I'm the Vice President of Education at BSD, and I oversee all of our curriculum development, including the pedagogical foundation for what leads us into our curriculum development process. And I try to weave inside of that innovative curriculum practices, which includes social emotional learning. I'm currently coming to you live from Chiang Mai, Thailand. It's in the north of Thailand in the mountain area. And I'm here in Thailand studying for my PhD in the field of computer engineering and artificial intelligence, looking at how children react to artificial intelligence and what they can learn about themselves through learning about AI. That's a topic for another webinar, but let's move on and talk a little bit about what we do at BSD. We provide a full service product that includes curriculum, a digital platform, training and support for teachers to learn how to code, learn how to program, but also a wide range of other digital skills like content creation, marketing, blog writing, all kinds of things that we think have a real impact for students in the 21st century. And what we really do is we help teachers provide these tools and these platforms so that they can teach students. We kind of have three main areas that we help educators with. The hard skills, which is coding and programming with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But inside those hard skills, we also have other layers of abilities. We like to pair those with the soft skills that students need, like communication, collaboration, and critical thinking, which are a part of the SEL, the social emotional learning framework. And then we tie that all together with our BSD core values, which we call CARE, which stands for curiosity, adaptability, resilience, and empathy. So you can see how social emotional learning is baked into the fabric, into the content that we deliver in our platform, in our curriculum, and ultimately for teachers to deliver to students. I'll share more about some of our example work later in this webinar. But first, let's talk a little bit about the CASEL framework. If you've never heard of that before, I'm going to explain to you what it is and how it's implemented. But before we do that, I want to just share some research that was conducted recently. So, in the past couple of years, we've had this global shift to online learning, not necessarily because we wanted to, but because the pandemic has forced us to do so. So researchers at MIT started to conduct some research about schools who have transitioned to online learning. And they asked schools, and they asked principals, they asked teachers, they asked students, they asked parents, what is the most important aspect of online learning? And so they got a lot of feedback on this. And you might think that some of these things that are most important might be like having a really good online teaching platform like Zoom or Google Classroom, or having the highest internet speed, or having an environment that's conducive for online learning at home. But that's not what they found. What they found in the research is that the most important thing for online learning is actually relationships. Relationships end up being the most critical aspect for online teaching. And the research further pursues the different relationships that are needed to be cultivated for online learning. Teacher to student relationships are critical, student to student relationships, teacher to teacher relationships, and administrator to teacher relationships. And what the research found is that the first tier, teacher to student relationships, tend to be the ones that are easiest to cultivate. But because of the nature of our shift to online learning, student to student, teacher to teacher, and admin to teacher relationships tended to plummet. And so, I've talked to teachers and students who've never met their administrator before in real life. They've only ever met their administrator through online. And that's the world we live in now. And there are students who've never met their teacher face to face. So how can we cultivate these relationships and make a purpose to cultivate these relationships even though we're online? Well, that's what the research says. It says that we have to go out of our way to do this because it ends up being the most important and most critical aspect of online teaching. So one way that we can help to build and we can define and articulate relationships is through the CASEL framework. So if you've never heard of the CASEL framework, CASEL stands for Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And they're a group of educators and researchers who have put a lot of time and effort and money into developing this proven and research-based framework for how to integrate social emotional learning into classrooms in schools to improve social emotional connections, to build those fundamental relationships that we know are so valuable for online learning. So if we look at this chart on the left-hand side, there are 5 major critical areas for social emotional learning, which I'll go into more detail in the next slide. But what's really valuable about the CASEL framework is that it extends beyond the classroom and it starts to create a culture of social emotional learning beyond the room, beyond the classroom, beyond the walls of that room and into the school. And then if that is implemented well and correctly, that will extend out into the families and the caregivers of the students. And if that is implemented well, it can have a holistic effect on the entire community. So what I really like about the CASEL framework is that it's directed towards teachers and students, but it has such an overlapping and cascading effect that it can really transform an entire school, an entire ecosystem, and an entire community when we start to think about how social emotional learning can impact every person in that community, from the students to the teachers and to the parents. So the CASEL framework provides a roadmap of success for how to do this. So it starts with these 5 areas: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. These are the 5 core areas that help students to increase their own social emotional learning. So in the CASEL framework, it starts with these areas in the classroom, helping students to identify and understand and see where they lie in these areas, how to improve in these areas with tools, with communication strategies, with questions about awareness and how to make decisions, how to work together, how to cooperate. So the CASEL framework actually provides teachers with resources and tools for how to teach all of these and how to extend connections in the classroom to these areas. And we'll share more about this in a moment. And I want to leave you with some resources so you can explore this further, because it's a lot more than you can take in, in one professional development session. So one thing that I do want to mention about the CASEL focus areas and about their work is that the CASEL goal is to have a whole school systemic change. And they have a formula for how to do this. The first thing you have to do is to build a foundational support team. So that means that at your school, if you want to take on the CASEL framework, you need to have a core group of teachers and administrators who are in charge of taking this on, learning about it, learning about the roadmap and how to implement it. The next thing you would need to do is then create a plan for how you're going to implement the CASEL framework. And the next thing that we do before we bring it to students is that we strengthen adults' ability to have social emotional learning. So that means that we as the teachers need to fully comprehend all of these areas about our own selves. What is our own self-awareness? What is our own self-management? How are our own relationship skills? And if we need to work on ourselves a little bit, then we need to do that through workshops and professional development just for the teachers. Then once the teachers are ready and they feel comfortable and they have all of those skills that they need, then we bring it to the students. So you can see that it's not just a quick fix. We can't just say, okay, tomorrow we're going to do social emotional learning. Let's do that, check the box, move on. No, it's a very long process and it takes a lot of effort and skill, and it requires a foundational team to support this. So if you're interested in conducting this at your school and you want to use the CASEL framework and build up social emotional learning, I highly recommend that you take a look at their playbook. So my colleague Beth is going to put a link into the chat right now, and it's a link to the playbook for how to get started with the CASEL framework. If you're interested in doing this whole school approach where you're looking at the teacher level all the way to the student level, so that eventually, like this graph shows, you're affecting the classroom and beyond. And so that's why I recommend the CASEL framework as a way to approach social emotional learning. So it is kind of a bigger picture, more of a systemic effort. So please do take a look at that and explore on your own time more about how you would go about implementing that in your school. But since that's kind of a longer process, I want to share with you some example, just everyday, common, practical social emotional learning tools and practices that you can implement today. So I'm going to share with you a couple of things that I do in my own classrooms. And one of the things that I like to do is, that time that you have right before, if you're on Zoom or Google Hangouts and your class starts at 11 o'clock, but everybody's in the waiting room 5 minutes prior to that. This is an activity I like to do during that time. It's called a check-in. And I will pick either one of these images and I'll put it in the waiting room, and I'll ask students to just check in with me in the chat and tell me, how are you feeling today? And so depending on the age of the students, I'll go with emojis if they're younger. If they're middle schoolers, these kind of cat images or other animal images are a really fun way to just kind of break the ice, but also to kind of dig in and see where the student is. What are they feeling like? So I'll just say, hey, on the scale of cat, tell me how you're feeling today in the chat. And, students will look at this chart and kind of reflect and see how they're feeling. Hey, I'm feeling like cat 4, I'm super chill today, got my legs up, ready to learn. Or I feel like cat 8 today. I didn't sleep well. It's been a rough couple of days for me. And so when I see this information up in the chat, what I do is I make a mental note. So, sometimes when I'm teaching online, I teach courses around digital design and coding and programming. And sometimes my students have just come from a previous class, and maybe they came from math class, algebra 2 or whatever. And so everyone is coming to me, as cat 8. And I say, hey, what's up, guys? I see that a lot of you are feeling like cat 8. What's going on? What can I do to help? That's one way to use this as a strategy. Another way to use this strategy is that, let's say that a majority of my students come to the classroom and they say that they're feeling like cat 2, feeling like cat 4, ready to learn, but only one student mentions that they feel like cat 8. I'll make a little note of that, and that note will be to follow up with that student later after the class through a private message. And I'll reach out to that student and I'll say, hey, I noticed that, in the beginning of class, you were feeling like cat 8. Just wondering, if that's changed. Do you feel better? Do you feel worse? What's going on? How can I help you? And so what that helps me to do is it helps me to establish that critical teacher to student relationship. Remember earlier I mentioned that relationships are the most important aspect for online learning. And if we want to build social emotional learning between ourselves and our students, these are the kind of things we have to do. We got to really check in on them and see how they're doing and be there for them, to listen to them, to hear them, and to connect with them. So now that student is I'm going to build rapport with that student, and I'll reach out to them, next week and see how they're doing. And this is just a cool little tool that we can implement very easily, very quickly. It doesn't take a lot of time out of my day, and it starts to become part of every time we meet, I ask this question and get to know the students a little bit better. So you can find these images online. You can search for daily check-in, social emotional learning check-in, and there's several of these cat images or animal images that you can use. You can mix it up and then use it in your own way or come up with your own images. Another thing that I do in my classroom practices is that I always make a little bit of time either at the beginning or at the end of my class, just for us to have like nothing to do with the teaching, nothing to do with the content, just like, I want to get to know you. I want to talk about whatever's going on in your world. Me as the teacher, I'll share something that's going on in my world. And it's just a way for us to connect and be authentic and real with each other. And so since I teach students from all over the world, mostly in Asia and the Middle East, one thing that we've been able to connect on lately is I'll ask my students to share what it looks like in their house or what it looks like in their room or at their desk. So we do a little bit of show and tell. And so students will pick up their computer and kind of like, show us around their room. What does it look like? And then another thing that's been really cool is that we start to talk about what did we have for breakfast. And so, students that are, have breakfast in Hong Kong versus students in India versus students in Thailand where I'm at all have a different breakfast. And we talk about, the cultural identity of those different foods. So, it doesn't have anything to do with the class that I'm teaching today, but it helps me to build the social emotional relationship with my students because I'm looking to increase that ability with them. And another thing that I think is important in this area is that sometimes we also talk about the resilience that's required to kind of get through these tough moments that we're all having together. Sometimes it's tough to work online. Sometimes it's tough to always be at your house and do your schoolwork at the same time. So I share my own frustrations with my students and talk about how I'm able to overcome that and to have resilience. Because if you go back to the CASEL framework, resilience is one of those key areas that we need to focus on. And so the best way to learn resilience is through models, to see adults, how they handle resilience, shows students that they can do it too. And we start to bring together those connections and we start to build relationships together. So, I think this is an important thing that you can do. It doesn't require much time. It doesn't require much effort. It doesn't require lesson planning. You just, save 5 minutes at the end of class for you to have some cool conversations and get to know your students a little bit. This is really, I think, in my practice, one of the most valuable experiences that you can have. So, as you start to think about yourself, and how can you increase your own social emotional learning, here are some questions I'd like to pose to you. And you may not know the answer to these questions right away, but I want you to kind of let them sink in, think about them a little bit, and reflect on these. So the first question is, where am I with my own connection to social emotional learning? What is my own resilience level? What is my own ability to connect to relationships? What is my own ability to have strong communication? What is my own ability to have conflict resolution when that comes up? And if I need to work on myself a little bit, then I might go to that CASEL framework and look and see what are some resources that I can use. So the next question is, well, where can I start? Well, that depends on where you are, right? So you've got to have that first question answered about where am I before I know where I can start. So if I feel like I've already got a lot of good social emotional learning practices, then I might start at a different level, or I might look for resources to implement in the classroom. Or maybe I'm a leader and I want to start implementing the CASEL framework for my entire school, and that's where you want to start. The last question is, where do I need help? And it's okay to need help. Everybody needs help. It doesn't matter where you are. If you've never heard of social emotional learning and today is the first time you're experiencing that, then you need a lot of help. If you're a leader at a school and you want to implement this with your whole school and you have a cohort of teachers who are ready to go, then you need professional development on that level. So just acknowledge and be aware of where you are, where can you start, and where do you need help. Think about that, and maybe start to reflect on that after this session is over, so that you can think about where you want to go next in your social emotional learning journey. The next thing I want to talk about is how we can use play as a research-based way to increase social emotional learning and social emotional connections. And this is going to be a bit controversial for you all, because play is sometimes seen as a dirty word in education. We don't, and parents even too have difficulty with this. Like, I hear parents say, I don't send my child to school to play, I send them to learn. Well, if parents only knew that play just happens to be the most powerful form of learning and the most powerful way to connect to social emotional learning, they might change their mind about that. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to change your mind about it. So let's look at this picture here. This is just kind of a stock image of a child playing. But think about that child in your classroom who is always folding up a paper airplane, turning their pens into drums. Every single day in their backpack, they've got gadgets and toys and things. Every one of you teachers have had this child in your classroom at some point. So in the picture, the kid's supposed to be doing his homework or doing some kind of lesson or study, but instead the student is playing with a car or playing with something, right? And so I believe, and there's research to prove that this is true, and I think even parents and just good old-fashioned intuition tells you that the natural state of a child is to be in curiosity and to be full of wonder. That's what they do as children. Children are playful by nature. By nature, they're naturally curious, and they have a lot of wonder about the world. And the way that they express themselves and the way that they learn about the world is through play. That's just what children do. So instead of telling children not to play and say, go play on the playground or whatever, what if we could leverage this unique ability of children to play to our advantage, so that we could design lessons and projects and classroom materials that use play as a way for children to learn and also to grow their social emotional learning connections. So here's some research that proves that this is actually true. Some research that was conducted in the US about preschools was that when students had more opportunities for play, they actually ended up having long-term academic success and motivation for coming to school by the end of primary school. And this is true because we see that in lower primary, there are more opportunities for play, and that kind of disappears as we get older. I don't think that it should, and I'm telling you that we should increase play instead of decrease it. The next research says that when students are focused on pretend play, which is a great social emotional skill, that they actually end up increasing their ability to have interrelationships and complexity of relationships, which helps them to improve their overall emotional well-being. And this is just two examples of research. I could show you dozens of examples of research about how play is proven to be an effective way to increase learning and increase social emotional learning. And there are some giant research studies that are currently happening. Some of those are funded by Lego. And who better to fund play-based research than Lego, the largest manufacturer of toys on the planet? But Lego is interested in play more than just to sell Legos. So Lego has an arm of their company called the Lego Foundation, and they conduct research about the nature of play. And the research that they do isn't just about students playing with Legos. It's about all kinds of play: imaginative play, theatric play, dramatic play, play in indigenous environments with bamboo and rocks and sticks. They're basically interested in every form of play imaginable. So during the course of their research on play, they've come up with this pedagogy of play, and they've identified these 5 characteristics of play. So when students are involved in play, they are seem to be joyful. They're involved in meaningful work. They're doing iterations, so they're iteratively learning. They're trying things over and over again. They're actively engaged, and they're socially interactive. Now, if I took away the word play from this, and I just asked you, do you want your students to be joyful at school? Do you want them to be doing meaningful work? Do you want them to be actively engaged? Do you want them to be socially interactive? And do you want them to be learning in iterative cycles? you would say overwhelmingly, yes. But if I told you that the best way for students to do all of these things in a natural way is through play, you might be like, oh, well, okay, I don't know about that. But trust me, the research shows that this is the best way for students to learn and the best way for them to connect to social emotional learning. So the Lego pedagogy of play defines these 5 characteristics, but it also goes on to say that when students are involved in play, that they're building these critical social emotional skills. So when students are involved in natural play, besides social emotional connections, they're also doing physical things, which is important. They're also building cognitive skills, and they're using their creativity. So, why would you say no to this? If play is actually the most powerful way for children to learn, and it helps them connect to their social emotional natures, then why would we let go of that? Why would we push play out of the classroom and put it on the playground? Play should be a fabric of everything that we do. So at BSD, we tap into the power of play, and we believe that it's such a critical element of learning that we have built it into the progression of our curriculum, which I'll share more about later. But I want to share this quote with you from Seymour Papert, who was a researcher in the field of play and learning. As a matter of fact, at BSD, all of our pedagogical foundation leans on the research of Seymour Papert, who became the Lego Professor of Learning and Research at the MIT Media Lab. And so Seymour Papert says this: rather than pushing children to think like adults, we might do better to remember that they are great learners and try harder to be more like them. And if you think about, young children, think about preschool children and lower primary children, they are just absolutely curious about everything, and they're great learners. They want to learn everything. They have so many deep and provoking, thoughtful questions, and they want to figure things out. And the way that they figure things out is through play. So what Seymour Papert is trying to say is that we as teachers ought to play some more. We ought to get, on our hands and knees and get there with the students and be curious ourselves. So that's the philosophy that we have and that we try to convey to teachers through our practices, through our webinars, and through our curriculum. If you want to learn more about the pedagogy of play, the Lego Foundation currently has a free course online right now called Coping with Changes: Social Emotional Learning Through Play. And this course was developed to help teachers and students work through the resilience that's needed to get through these difficult times that we're having because of COVID-19, because of online learning, because of being locked in our homes for so long. If you're interested in this course, my colleague Beth is going to put the link to this. It's absolutely free. You attend the course. It's self-paced in your own time, but it's going to give you more skills and more information about how to leverage play to increase social emotional learning. I highly recommend it if you've got the additional time to take this course. Check the chat for the link to that course. The next thing I want to talk about is, how at BSD do we weave together social emotional learning and play to design projects for students? Because this is important, so as teachers, how can you start to think about designing lessons and designing courses that integrate social emotional learning and play? So the first project I want to talk to you about is this website that we have students build called a multi-page website. So at BSD, we like to combine coding and digital citizenship together inside of a project so that students aren't just learning how to code, but they're also learning how to do digital content creation. They're learning how to communicate and collaborate, which builds social emotional skills. So during this project, we asked students to build a website for a community organization. In our example, the community organization is the Kind Hearts Animal Sanctuary. So what we're asking students to do, and with the help of the teacher, is to actually find a community organization in your neighborhood, in your community, in your town that needs a new website. There are all kinds of charities and there are all kinds of organizations in your town already that would love to partner with you and build a website for them. And so the purpose of this is that we also are going to use a little bit of empathy and understanding. And remember, empathy is one of those key areas in social emotional learning that we want students to build. So in this project, the students have to consult with the community organization. So in the example for the Kind Hearts Animal Sanctuary, the students would need to learn about what does this organization do? Why do they do it? What's important about it? How does it impact the animals? they need that information so that they can make a website for it. And that website needs to have all of the correct information, and it needs to display the information in a meaningful way. So our project brings together social emotional skills. There's room for play here because students are going to be playfully designing the website, playfully exploring the connections to the customers, and then also playfully composing the elements of the website itself. So students are learning hard skills, they're learning soft skills, they're learning social emotional skills all together in this unique project. And it can have a real impact in their communities. So using that CASEL framework, when we go outside of the school and we go to our communities, we're expanding the zone of empathy, and we're expanding the connections to our communities through an impactful and social way. So this is one of the projects, and it's just an example of how we conduct business at BSD. This is how we design projects, because we believe that bringing all of these things together is more impactful than just learning how to build a website. If you want to try some of our projects, we want to get you involved, and we want you to try our projects. So we're offering a free trial. So if this is something that interests you, my colleague Beth is going to put a link right now into the chat so that you can sign up for our free trial. In our free trial, we're going to give you access to 8 projects. There are 8 of these projects that all kind of blend together social emotional learning, blends together playful adventures, blends together learning how to code with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make a cool project. Here are the projects. The first one's called The People Who Inspire Me, in which you build a website that shows the 3 people in your life who are most inspiring to you. We've got a trivia game maker where you put your own questions and your own answers into it. The last one is a project called Support My Cause, in which we ask students to design a campaign that they're passionate about. In the example, it's a clean air campaign, but it could be a Save the Animals campaign, or it could be Feed the Homeless campaign. And we ask students to collect supporters, and they get their message out and they share it around the world. All of these projects are video guided. So that means that every step of the way, there's a video that explains every step. It's very easy to implement. So if you're interested, sign up on the link with the free trial. You can also contact us for any questions that you may have about that. So if you're interested in the way that we conduct projects at BSD and interested in how we connect to social emotional learning, this is a great way to do that. Thank you for joining us on the webinar. I do want to hear your feedback. Was this appropriate for you? Did you get something good out of it? And also let us know if you want to see something in the future. If there's a particular type of topic you'd like to hear from us more about, please do give us that in the feedback. So my colleague Beth is going to put the link to this feedback into the chat right now. You can click on it and open a tab and fill it out later after the webinar is over, or you can feel free to fill it out right now. I want to thank you all for joining me today. Some of you have been here through multiple of these webinars, so it's nice to see some familiar faces. But I do just want to, end the webinar and see if there are any questions, any comments, any suggestions, thoughts, ideas, criticisms out there. I'm going to go to the chat right now and just see if any questions have come up. And then if you've got a question, feel free to come on turn your camera on, turn your mic on, and jump right in. Yeah, some of you have said to me in private message that you're going to check out the free trial. Thank you, I appreciate that. Any problems at all, just reach out to us at BSD. We're happy to help. Yeah, so Beth has put the links to all of the items that I shared earlier. The research from MIT, that's a long thing that you could read and get into the details of that. The CASEL framework and essentials is a lot of information for you to go through to help you implement the CASEL framework at your school if you're interested in the Lego Foundation research, and also that course that I mentioned, the Coping with Changes and Using Social Emotional Learning as a way to help you and a way to help students use the nature of play. So I think, yeah, that's the end of the webinar so far. And if you've got anything else to say or anything else to mention, please drop that in the chat or come off of microphone and ask me right away. Beth, did you have any other comments or questions coming in from the chat on your end?
No questions as of yet from the chat, but yeah.
All right, fantastic. Beth, let's go ahead and close out the webinar. And everyone who is here today, thank you for joining. If you joined us live on YouTube, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll check the comment section later to see if there's anything we need to respond to. And we do hope to see you all on the next webinar, and be sure to stay in contact with us to see which webinars we have upcoming, what the topics are, and please do fill out the feedback form so we can continue to provide the best content for all of you. Some people asked if they join late, will you be able to share the presentation? Yeah, everyone who's here today will get an email follow-up with this, with the link, because this was recorded and it's also live on YouTube. So once again, thank you all, and I hope to see you next time on our next webinar. Cheers, everyone.